Hi everyone, welcome to the latest episode of Absolute Candor. This time, Mike and I are reviewing The Last of Us Season 2, Episode 3, The Path, which, coming off the back of that unbelievable behemoth of a story in the second episode with those huge implications for, well, the show and those characters moving forward, I think it was important that this episode did sort of reduce the spectacle and brought us back down to earth a little bit, focusing on the characterization, focusing on how those characters are reacting in the fallout to Joel's death. Should perhaps have prefaced as well, if you are clicking on this video and you have not seen Season 2, Episode 3 of The Last of Us, or certainly not perhaps have caught up entirely with the season, this is a full spoiler review, so please do click off, go watch it, and then come back to check out our thoughts. It's really tricky, I think, when you've created, I think, one of the most ambitious and emotionally draining episodes of television in that second episode in Through the Valley, and for anything that followed that up, it was never going to, the mistake would have been to try and one up themselves in terms of emotional resonance or having some kind of another major set piece. I think it was very smartly pitched down in its stakes, and it felt more of like a transitional episode, more kind of a slow build, and that actually I think did it a great favor, because we saw some lovely interactions. My favorite scene in the whole episode is Ellie and Dina in the dining room as they're going over the plans. They're talking about the WF group and what they're going to do next. The council scene I thought also was really interesting, seeing that play out, her giving a speech. That because the council isn't in part 2, that doesn't exist as part of the game, so all of that stuff was unique for the show. Having Seth, the racist, homophobic guy at the beginning, sort of suddenly be the one to pipe up. Yeah.
Racist as well now, is he?
Well, that's actually just adding to the pile. The racist sandwich or homophobic sandwich, I forget which one it was a line of dialogue in the original game. And originally, that was all he does. That's all he says. That's all he is. He has the moment in the bar where he has to apologize, and that's it. We don't get that moment with him equipping them with what they need, their provisions and their supplies. We certainly don't get him speaking up in a town hall. So actually, I think again a really smart point of deviation there from the game, and that those moments landed for me really well. It was nice to have him feel a bit more fleshed out.
Yeah, I think in the context of the show, for them not to have that, it would have been a bit weird. Mm-hmm. If you haven't played the game, it's like, why have they introduced this Seth guy just so that Ellie and Joel have that slight interaction? Is that the only reason to do it? But having fleshed him out a bit more in this third episode, it made a lot more sense and just much better rounded.
Yeah, well, that seems to also be something that I think we've seen the hints of Eugene, haven't we? His name has been dropped in every episode so far. It's a character that is unseen in The Last of Us Part 2. It is, for me, I think what they're doing with that is what they did with Bill's relationship in the first season, where, again, it was only hinted at, his relationship there, and we obviously got an entire episode showing their entire arc, which was brilliant. I hope the show continues to lean on those elements. Catherine O'Hara, again, having a drink at the baseball game, talking to Tommy.
That was probably my favourite scene. I mean, not a lot happened, but it's just the interaction between the two characters, and she's probably my favourite character in the show. Obviously, she's only been in a couple of episodes, but I look forward to every scene that she's in. Mm-hmm. So
it's a really strong new addition there, I think, isn't it? And she's fit into the cast really well. I had my first moment in this episode. It was actually, I'm kind of jumping ahead a bit now, right to the end. I had my first moment watching this show where I felt the production value creak slightly in the shot of Dina and Ellie going away from Seattle, from the shot of Seattle at the end. That looked very green screen and really stood out. It almost looked like it was a composite that wasn't finished. It looked like it needed a bit of a final pass on it.
They're tough. They're tough. Those scenes where you have all the cars with vegetation growing over them. There was a bit that when they were on the highway, I think when they were just walking in, and there was a car that was like 2 meters in front of them that we could just tell was CG, and it was like, just get a car.
Yeah,
but I get completely the constraints that they have, and But it's just for the most part, it looks so good that when you have something that doesn't quite look right, you're surprised that someone hasn't just said, "We just need to sort that out."
And
It looks
that's
a bit
what
shit.
what a bizarre problem for them to have, in that they've become sort of victims of their own success. HBO at this scale have produced shows with the kind of production value that really is unmatched outside of cinema, outside of the film industry. So they've been able to compete at that level, and the end product has been all the better for it. It's been more immersing. It's seemed more grounded and more real. So they do, I think, end up they do stick out more prominently because everything else is so on point and so well done. And it was just I don't know whether it was just the angle of the shot, the lighting, or it could be a combination of both. Just didn't click for me. It was a weird moment. It took me out of it a little bit. There was also, I think, the introduction of the Scars. That group of that young group.
Oh, I
We
wanted to
saw
ask you, but are they in the game?
they are in the game. Yeah, they're a major faction in the game. You've got the WLF, the Wolves, which we saw obviously right at the end, that last shot, which I thought was a really nice setup for episode 4, what we're going to see next week. Seeing the scale of their operation. So that's Abby's group, and they're enormous. They've completely taken over Seattle, and the WLF and the Scars are directly opposed in the game, and you often third party a lot of their conflicts as Ellie.
I was going
And
to ask about whether Ellie comes into contact with the Scars as well.
yes,
Or just
she
Abby.
does. Yeah, and Abby does too. And because in the game you flip between their perspectives, you play as Ellie and you play as Abby.
Yeah.
And I think actually that while I was very impressed with the makeup design and the costuming, it's very very faithful to the game. And actually, I would find something like that quite tricky, given that because there's a bit of a religious connotation to the Scars group, and the way that they're not just cutting themselves. It's a very specific design that they're doing that they really managed to evoke in the show. They did a really nice job with that, and it was very sort of uncomfortable seeing the adult talking to his child in such explicit terms. That created an unease as we were watching it that I thought was really effective. The casual nature of them talking about them having to kill to survive and all of that. It painted
The bit where he lets the child hold the hammer, and then at the end she's got the hammer when she's been killed. That was really
real,
struck a nerve,
and it really hit what it was supposed to there. I think that worked well. I think, that being said, it was probably the only other negative I really want to sort of level at this episode, which is I think it might have been one element too many in this particular episode. I think I'm starting to feel the restriction of a 7-episode season.
A
little bit.
I'd love more episodes.
Yeah, it's cut down. It was 9 episodes in season 1 and cut down to 7. I would imagine the now already renewed season 3, given that the seasons 2 and 3 are both adapting part 2's content, that season 3 is most likely going to be 7 episodes as well, most likely. I feel like the introduction of the Scars here at this point in the story, when so much has happened already, I think we could have had more time unpacking the aftermath at Jackson before the time jump. I didn't want that 3 months later, particularly.
So why is that? Because they've got the Jackson set, they could easily like, if it was The Walking Dead, they'd have an hour where nothing happens, no action happens at all. It's just people talking in Jackson.
Yeah.
Are they doing it to keep the pace of the show? Why have they cut it to 7? Why have they cut it to 7 episodes? Is it purely financial, or is it like they want it to be fast?
I think they're all reasonable questions. I think there's a few factors potentially affecting that. Budget certainly could be one. If they knew that they were going to likely be getting a season 3 renewal, they've sort of essentially budgeted that out. They're going to keep the Jackson sets ready for that next season. So there's definitely an element of that affecting it.
Season 3 hasn't filmed. They didn't do like back-to-back filming.
I haven't back-to-backed it, no, but it's been renewed now, and it's going to be filming this summer, ready for next year. So I actually think you're right. I think it is to do with pacing, and I think because so much actually of the source material has been changed, and the structure of the show isn't playing out like the structure of the game. Even in its opening, like the very opening of part 2, you actually play as Joel. The very, very first moments of the game, you are playing as him as you come up to Jackson. Then it does a sort of back and forth tennis match between Ellie and Abby. You play as Ellie, for a huge chunk of the game after that. Then you switch to Abby, and you finally go back to Ellie again. So it's constantly changing your player perspective. So the show isn't doing that at all. We're obviously very centered on Ellie and Jackson, and we haven't spent a huge amount of time with Abby at all. I think I could have potentially done with seeing more of the immediate aftermath to Joel's death, because I thought the opening of the episode where Ellie's in the hospital, she wakes up screaming thinking it was a nightmare, and then Tommy taking over and cleaning his body was such a it was like a hold your breath kind of scene. It really, with the sort of the still the burning fire in the background. You know, there's still parts of Jackson still affected by the immediate aftermath of the battle. The colours of all that, the sort of the oranges and browns looked amazing. I could have done with a bit more time, I think, before we jumped. I think part of it is so that we get to Ellie and Dina going on their journey, breaking out and going off to hunt Abby. I think it was a TV show pacing issue. I just would have potentially, if you then had, say, 9 episodes, would have had a sort of an aftermath in Jackson, and then episode 4 would have picked up the threads of the wolves and the scars, and we would have then left Jackson with Ellie and Dina after that. So I think that it did feel a little rushed to get the scars in there at this stage, and to suddenly be out of Jackson already. I think it would have been nice to have stuck around a bit longer.
Yeah, obviously, I don't know what happens in the rest of the game. Without spoiling it, can you see, because we obviously still got 4 episodes left.
Yep.
To me, that seems like Ellie and Dina are on their way to find Abby now.
Mm-hmm.
4 episodes seems like plenty to do that, compared to when, you know, we're watching like Picard and it's like the second to last episode and they haven't done anything yet.
Yeah.
And they've got to wrap it all up. Or often, you know, sometimes that happens. It seems like that's plenty of time to tell the story, obviously, without knowing the full context.
Yeah,
is that the case, or is there?
Yeah, I think again a fair question. I think again, so to preserve the experience, because again, as much as I'm making references now, you know, I discussed it with you in our second episode review that I think it's inevitable, and I think it's actually useful to be drawing comparisons with the game as we're talking about the show. It would be, you know, people were referencing the comics for The Walking Dead and the changes they made to that when they were reviewing the series. So I think it's a relevant thing to include, given that the sort of the main sort of mid chunk of the game, you play as Ellie and then you switch gears to Abby. It's possible one way this plays out is that there's a moment that happens, which I won't spoil, where then the perspectives change, where you go from Ellie to Abby. And I think that could be a season 2, season 3 change.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
And there's a possibility that that's the way they're going to go with it, to give that experience, so that actually Abby then becomes the protagonist of season 3.
Because presumably in the game, the whole reason you're playing as Abby is so that you can relate to her experience. Because at the moment, Abby's like a bitch. We don't want her to succeed because she killed Joel. We're all on Ellie's side, which isn't. If they suddenly had an episode from Abby's point of view, they just need to handle that carefully, is what I'm saying, because we're all against Abby at the moment. Which
yes, and I think actually while players obviously were against her in the game from that moment, obviously for the same reason, her motivation wasn't revealed at that point in the story, and I do think that was a mistake. I think the show has pulled the trigger on her motivations too early, because what that did is it gave us then, when we then played as her, the gradual reveal of why that she did what she did. And because you are playing it in her shoes, and like for instance the game features flashbacks where you play as a younger Abby with her father, and she's sort of like a young Firefly in training, and the game is sort of a drip feed reveal. And I suppose the game where you're playing for 25 hours gives you a lot more scope to dig in, much like, you know, when you take something like Harry Potter and the novels, those books have the ability to go into much greater depth than, say, a 2-hour film could, right? So I get that there's going to need to be an expediency, we mentioned the pace already, in order for that adaptation to take place and for it to work as a TV show. I think, though, that we could have still held back on why she was doing what she was doing. If it was just at face value, I think it could have been quite interesting that when we saw her at the graves of the Fireflies and then saying that we're all that's left, that it just became this, we want revenge for the Fireflies on behalf of them. And then later on, they hold back the reveal that it was more of a personal hit for her. I think that would have been quite nice to follow up maybe next season. We obviously haven't got that. That's not the way it's played out, but yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like it would have been quite powerful to just because obviously we know who the Fireflies are from the first season, even if you haven't played the game. When Jackson's under attack by the Horde, you just have they're basically random. They appear to be random Fireflies that turn up, and then later on you find out that it's Abby's got this motivation, and that's why she's a bit unhinged. Yeah, I feel like I agree. It's a much more because your instant reaction is why is she like this, and then you find out why she's like this, and then you think, oh, okay, well maybe you can understand because now Ellie's gone on a revenge mission, which is basically exactly the same thing that Abby's done, gone on a revenge mission. But the way it started, and I think that some of the writing for Abby as well has just been almost a bit over the top in terms of
too explicit. I think it was too
approach.
too exposition heavy, and I think just some of I think tonally, I think like the thing about we mentioned it before in the last episode about her commenting on Joel's attractiveness, I just felt was really misplaced. It was a really really strange choice. Ultimately the point of the story from the games was that you empathize with her side because it's about what point do you break a cycle of revenge. That is the fundamental question, and I think that is still playing out here. We've seen, I think, Ellie's. What I quite like is that actually she seems a little bit more measured. I wonder if part of the 3-month time jump, the one benefit of it is that we then catch up with an Ellie that, yes, is still affected by Joel's death, but she's not grieving him constantly. We get that lovely scene of her in the house, with his jacket and the watch, which is beautifully done. I thought Bella Ramsey did a fantastic... When it was just that slow shot that hung on her in his closet.
The house as well was really good.
And having then Dina and her talking there was great,
Creaky floorboards. I wouldn't want to live in that house.
Everyone knows that you're going for a shit. Like it's happening. But those moments I think landed really well. And actually the benefit of the time jump showed then it's showing the recovered Jackson, and it showed them, in the right headspace to be heading out. It's in the game, it does come across very reactionary. It's very knee-jerk, her need to leave. And I think, actually, I like what the show has done in showing a bit more of a measured approach to her. And it makes it seem a little bit more logical that Dina would then follow and go with her.
Waiting for the council, she thought there was a chance they were going to help her, which seemed reasonable, and she didn't just go off on her own. She was trying to wait for help and stuff.
Some lovely...
The council bit was nice to get the opinions of random people, because sometimes it could be too focused on Ellie and not realistic as to there's all these other people that have got needs and stuff. And
there was to hear two things in that council scene I thought worked really nicely. That she was the last item on the docket. So they'd been talking about a bunch of stuff and they were trying to move on from some of the other stuff that was a bit redundant, which I really liked. Yeah. But there was some really great non-verbal moments in that where you saw Tommy, who I think voted yes to approve it. That was my read on the scene. But that you could see him realizing what was happening before the vote was tallied.
The reading out the yes, no, yes. It seems really impractical, but it worked really well for the suspense because you're like, how many? And then eventually it's like 3 no's in a row or something, and it's obvious they're not going to get it. But I wanted to ask you who you thought voted. Was it 3 yeses they got?
Yeah, I think both Maria and Tommy did, and I actually think Jesse voted no because I think he, in my head, knowing that he's still obviously with Dina. I think he was assuming that she would go with Ellie, and therefore didn't want her to go. I think it was more self-preservation for her.
Well, now she's gone on her own.
Gone anyway.
So it's backfired, isn't it?
Yeah. And then of course, then we catch up. We then see, I actually think that they could have held the flashback of the scars. We could have held that again for a future episode. Maybe just them coming across the decimated bodies, which gives the wolves, the WLF, that kind of like instant threat feeling. And I think we could have then had the context around the scars later on. Potentially, I think that could have been held again. I think just it felt a bit rushed. But in terms of like cinematography and performance, we've shouted out Catherine O'Hara already as the therapist. I mean, she was brilliant in that scene. And shout out to Gabriel Luna as well, who played Tommy. I think he had a really strong episode again this time, just playing all those different flavors of his character. But I absolutely adored the Dina and Ellie going to visit Joel's grave sequence. The sort of like sunset in the fields shots. Absolutely beautifully shot, and really, really hit her putting the coffee beans on his grave was real gut punch moment, and worked again really effectively. Again, just proving how versatile and how capable this cast is. There's so many, even without, I felt the absence of Pedro, as you should, but this cast is still really strong, and was certainly, it didn't feel like they weren't able to carry it.
No, for me it was still a really strong episode, and I think, like you said, it was needed after the last one. You're always expecting kind of a slower pace for this one. My criticism of the previous episode was that we didn't get Ellie's reaction properly to Joel's death, so this is exactly what I wanted, and it was really solid.
Absolutely. Well, looking ahead to episode 4, we've got Isaac, who is the leader of the WLF, and he is played by Jeffrey Wright, who played him in the game too, which is really cool. So he's actually a character, of all the characters that I was wanting some more time with, he's a very minor role in the video game, and I really hope we get to spend some time with him in the 4th episode. And I think that there's potential for that, surely. We had in season 1, I forget her name, I think it's Merle Dandridge, I think is her name. She played Marlene, the leader of the Fireflies. She played that in both the game and the show. So having Jeffrey Wright come back as Isaac in this season is really cool as well. And we'll see where the next harrowing part of this show takes us. Folks, thank you so much for tuning in to the latest episode of Absolute Candor. You can see all our episodes of our podcasts on both YouTube, Podbean, and Spotify, which you can catch for free. We're also at Burly Bird Media on Threads, Facebook, Instagram, and also our Discord. So please jump in and check it out. We always try to sort of share these episodes and unpack them in our Discord with chats with the community. So please do consider checking that out. Mike, where can people find you?
I'm at thexboxguide.com, and the same on Threads and Blue Sky.
Lovely. Folks, we will see you next time.